Hi everybody, we're in The Three Worlds, The Plan of Redemption, Nelson Barbour and Charles Taze Russell's work of 1877. Principally the work of Barbour, of course, which puts into light the predicament we're all in now, that ultimately many of our, if we're ex-Jehovah's Witnesses or active witnesses, many of our teachings root back to a man called Nelson Barbour and other Adventists that were around before Charles Taze Russell founded the Watchtower. So in this section we're looking at some of the core teachings and looking at how it was that the Watchtower captured tens of millions of people. We don't know the actual number, but I estimate it's somewhere between 15 and 20 million Jehovah's Witnesses, as well as others who fell into the trap of Russellism, have been captured by this movement, or movements built around the Adventist speculations of the 1860s, 70s, and on unto today. So we're looking now at Barbour and Russell's interpretation of Revelation 17. We're at verse 11. And a key concept in the capture of these millions is in this section of Revelation. So let's go with their narrative explanation of it. Verse 11, where the beast goes into perdition. This is, by the way, page 25 of the book. The end is reached when the beast goes into perdition. It will be remembered the prophet was taken in spirit from the Isle of Patmos and the year AD 96 down the stream of time to the judgment on the woman while he was seeing the vision. Thus most of it is mentioned as in the past. But in the explanation it is not so. With that, nearly all is in the future from AD 96. The beast that thou sawest, in verse 8, in the vision you have seen, the 10 horns which you sawest, in verse 12. Without recognizing these two standpoints, that is, the standpoints of time, all is confusion. But if you allow, as the text demands, that the seeing is down the stream of time to where the judgment is executed on the papacy, while the explanation is back at the date of the prophecy, all is harmony. So he's saying basically watch the tenses. What is actually future will be in the past in the text itself. So here goes the explanation. The 10 horns which thou sawest have received no kingdom as yet, in the year 96 that is. The empire had not yet been divided, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb. That's verses 12 to 14. Here a rapid survey, even to the end, is again given. After a few centuries, the empire was divided, and these 10 received power as kings 1 hora, that is hour. That is a little season. The same word, hora, is thus rendered in Philemon, verse 15. He therefore departed for a season. But it was a very short time after the empire was fully divided into its parts, as all historians are aware, before these 10 kings did become of one mind, that is, they all became Catholic, and gave their power and strength to the beast. Verse 15, the waters which thou sawest are peoples, etc. Verse 16, the 10 horns which thou sawest shall hate the whore, and make her desolate and naked. And who so blind as not to see its present fulfillment? Verse 17, for God hath put it into their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God, that is the 1260 years, shall be fulfilled. Now, of course, he's inserted that number, has he not? Since which they have made her desolate. Then verse 18, and the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. Thus the symbol and the explanation are complete, and our present locality clearly defined. The fourth empire has come, has been divided into 10 parts, been lost or submerged under Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. And the beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, and go into perdition. The 7 heads have come, and the 8th, the beast itself, without a head, everywhere coming to the surface, as seen in the International Commune. Again, the rise of communism, as it was called in those days. Grangers, labor organizations, and extending all over parts of the world. In fact, the body of the people everywhere are being molded like the potter's clay and prepared for the death struggle. And soon the rich men who have heaped treasures together for the last days will weep and howl for their miseries that shall come upon them. At the partial development of this headless monster near the end of the last century, that is, the 18th century, when the streets of Paris ran with gore, the blood of her rich, her noble, and her beautiful, men looked on with wonder. But now, when every man's hand shall be against his brother, and all confidence between man and man shall have forsaken the earth, and here they cite Micah 7, verses 1 to 6, when the thrones are cast down, when law and order gives way before the mad passions of the ruthless mob, when want of work and hunger shall turn good men to demons, when the coming time of trouble shall be fully inaugurated. Keep in mind, he's already said in prior chapters, they have said, I should say, that the time of trouble was already upon us from 1874. Then indeed they whose names are not written in the Lamb's book of life from the foundation of the world shall wonder when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. This time of trouble, already beginning, is to swell to a mighty wave during the coming 40 years. Its measure is found by two prophetic periods, one marking its beginning, the other its end, which for lack of space here must appear in some future number, that is, a future tract. I will only say the 7 times of the Gentiles, or 2,520 years, during which Jerusalem was to be trodden down of the 4 Gentile kingdoms, does not end for 40 years from the beginning of the Jewish year, commencing April 6, 1875, as may be seen by adding 2,520 to 606. Now note this, his date for the conquest of Jerusalem is 606, the date of the beginning of their captivity, and the treading underfoot of Jerusalem. But the kingdom of God is to be set up before the days of the Gentiles end. For in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, and it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms. And here, of course, a familiar proof text, Daniel 2:44. And this breaking in pieces, together with the battle of the great day, are some of the events of this 40 years of trouble, and synchronized with Revelation 17, verse 14, where it says, these 10 kings shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. And thus the nations will be bound for 1,000 years under the real Christ, as the dragon has been, in a very limited sense, under the Antichrist. So we see very clearly here that all of this, including Daniel 2:44, the destruction by the rock, the stone, of all these kingdoms, is to happen before 1914. By comparing Revelation 12:9 and 20 verse 1, it will be seen that the dragon, called the devil and Satan, are the same in each, and the angel of Revelation 20, with the great chain who binds the dragon, represents the army of Christ, who subdue the nations and rule them with a rod of iron, to bind their kings with chains and their nobles with fetters of iron, to execute upon them the judgment written. This honor hath all the saints. That's according to Psalm 149, verse 8. The saints shall judge the world, according to 1 Corinthians 6, verse 2. One wonders where he's going with this. The binding of the dragon is a work of time, but will be consummated by the end of this 40 years. For there the times of the Gentiles end. Is that clear? It will all be over after 40 years. So, we're linking on your screen how finished was the mystery, and what did they make of these disappointments, because if after 40 years it was all to be winding down, what were they going to do after Russell died? And so, of course, how finished the mystery. So that series is on your screen. And also a part of that same group of videos, little testimony, how finally she got revelation and began to care about the book after all these disappointments, of course, including 1975 and the disappointments of the 1980s, the peace and security declarations, etc. How is it possible to keep your enthusiasm about the book of Revelation? Vivian gives a bit of testimony on that in the second video, attached or linked. But here we clearly see the gotcha good news of Nelson Barbour and Charles Taze Russell. If indeed your message, your good news, is about the book of Revelation or Daniel, or both, as it is clearly in this book, if your message is about those books, then indeed you're going to need a messenger. You're going to need someone to be able to explain the mystery to you. So that's one way that the cults do get you, is to make the message about prophetic interpretation rather than the gospel of Jesus Christ. Not about the future, in other words, in the gospel of Jesus Christ, about the past events. The past events listed for us in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 1 to 3, and in the proclamation of Jesus in the book of Acts. So on your screen, how finished was the mystery by 1917, and how I finally got revelation.